My name is Ella Johnson, and I am a 32-year-old woman living in the beautiful, but often gray city of Seattle, Washington. If you know anything about Seattle, you know that the rain is a constant companion, and the coffee is as essential as oxygen. But for me, there was always one thing that mattered more than anything else, and that was my lunch. I work as a senior project coordinator for a mid-sized marketing firm called Emerald City Creative, and let me tell you, the corporate world can be a real grind. I spend my days staring at spreadsheets and sitting through meetings that could have been emails, and trying to manage the egos of people who think they are much more important than they actually are. In a world of chaos and deadlines, my lunch hour was the one thing I could control. I am a passionate cook, and I do not mean that I just throw some pasta in a pot and call it a day. I spend my Sunday afternoon's meal prepping like it is a competitive sport. I make slow-roasted Moroccan lamb with herb-infused couscous, and I prepare pan-seared salmon with a lemon butter reduction and roasted asparagus. My coworkers usually eat soggy sandwiches or greasy fast food from the place down the street, but I treat myself to a 5-star meal every single day at noon. It was my reward for dealing with the stress of the office, and it was the highlight of my entire day. However, about 6 months ago, something changed. It started small. One Monday, I went to the communal refrigerator in the break room to grab my container of honey-glazed chicken and sweet potato mash, only to find that my fork was missing. I thought it was strange, but I figured maybe I had just forgotten to pack it. Then a few days later, a side of garlic bread went missing. I was annoyed, but I told myself to let it go. But then the unthinkable happened. On a Tuesday afternoon, I walked into the kitchen with my stomach growling in anticipation of my homemade lasagna, and the entire glass container was gone. I searched every shelf of that refrigerator, and I even looked in the trash thinking maybe someone had knocked it over, but it was just completely gone. That was the day the war began. My life at Emerald City Creative was already complicated because of my direct supervisor, a man named Brendan Vance. Brendan was 45 years old and the kind of man who wore too much cologne and always managed to take credit for my ideas during our weekly strategy sessions. He was loud and arrogant, and he had this habit of hovering over my shoulder while I worked, which always made my skin crawl. He was my primary nemesis in the office, but I had no proof that he was the one stealing my food. In fact, the office was full of potential suspects. There was Sarah, the perpetually hungry intern, who seemed to live on energy drinks and air, and there was Greg from the accounting department, who was always complaining about how expensive groceries were. I felt like a detective in a mystery novel, but instead of a murder, I was investigating a series of grand thefts of poultry and pasta. After the lasagna incident, I decided to play it cool at first. I posted a polite sticky note on the refrigerator door that said, "Please do not eat food that does not belong to you," but the very next day my balsamic glazed steak tips disappeared. The note was still there, but someone had drawn a little smiley face on it in red marker. I was absolutely livid. I went to the Human Resources Department to complain to the director, a woman named Mrs. Higgins, who looked like she had not smiled since the 1980s. I explained the situation and told her that someone was repeatedly stealing my property. Mrs. Higgins just peered at me over her reading glasses and said that the company was not responsible for personal items left in common areas, and that I should probably just start bringing a cooler bag and keeping it under my desk. I tried to explain that keeping raw fish or dairy under my desk for 4 hours in a warm office was a recipe for food poisoning, but she just went back to her typing and ignored me. I felt completely unsupported and vulnerable. My one sanctuary had been violated, and nobody seemed to care. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I bought a small lunch bag with a combination lock on the zippers. I thought for sure that would solve the problem because nobody is going to spend time trying to crack a code in a public break room, right? I was wrong. 2 days later, I found my lunch bag sitting on the counter with the fabric sliced open by what looked like a box cutter. The container of shrimp scampi inside was gone. At this point, I was not just hungry, I was heartbroken. That shrimp had cost me $20 and 2 hours of prep time. I felt a deep sense of injustice burning in my chest. I started to lose sleep over it. I would lie awake at night wondering who could be so bold and so cruel. My work performance began to suffer because I was so distracted by my hunger and my anger. I made a mistake on a client report, and Brendan Vance made sure to point it out in front of the entire team during the Friday afternoon meeting. He smirked at me and said maybe if you spent less time worrying about your fancy lunches, Ella, you could focus on your deliverables. The room went silent and I felt my face turn bright red. I realized then that Brendan was not just a bad boss, he was enjoying my misery. Whether he was the thief or not, he was weaponizing my frustration against me. I reached my lowest point the following Monday. I had prepared a special birthday lunch for myself since my birthday was that coming Sunday. It was a decadent lobster mac and cheese with toasted breadcrumbs and truffle oil. I had been looking forward to it all morning. When I went to the kitchen at noon, the refrigerator door was standing wide open, and my locked bag, which I had patched up with duct tape, was gone entirely. Not just the food, but the whole bag. I broke down and started crying right there in front of the microwave. Sarah, the intern, walked in and asked if I was okay, but I just pushed past her and went to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. I felt defeated. I felt like I was being bullied in my own professional home, and I had no way to fight back. But as I stared at my reflection in the mirror, a new feeling began to replace the sadness. It was a cold and calculating resolve. If they wanted to play games with my food, then I was going to give them a meal they would never forget. I spent the next 3 nights researching on the internet. I looked up everything from industrial-strength laxatives to ghost peppers, but I knew I had to be careful. I did not want to end up in legal trouble or get fired for causing physical harm to a coworker, even if they deserved it. I needed something that would catch them red-handed without sending them to the hospital. That was when I remembered an old story my grandmother told me about a baker who used to catch bread thieves using food coloring. It was brilliant because it was non-toxic and perfectly safe to eat, but it was also incredibly difficult to remove from skin and teeth. I went to a specialty baking supply store in downtown Seattle, and I asked for the most concentrated professional-grade food coloring they had. The clerk behind the counter showed me a tiny jar of what she called midnight violet. She warned me that it was so strong it could stain a marble countertop if you were not careful. It was perfect. I went home and spent hours preparing the trap. I decided to make a deep dish chicken pot pie. It is a hearty meal with a thick golden crust and a creamy filling that hides everything underneath. I cooked the chicken and the vegetables and made a delicious gravy, but before I put the top crust on, I created a hidden reservoir in the center of the pie. I used a small piece of hollowed-out bread to act as a container, and I filled it with half the jar of midnight violet dye. Then I carefully placed the top crust over it and crimped the edges so it looked like any other homemade pie. I even added some decorative leaf shapes made of dough on top to make it look extra enticing. It looked like a masterpiece. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. I placed the pot pie in a brand new bright red lunchbox that I had purposefully not locked. I wanted it to be as easy as possible for the thief to access. I put it on the middle shelf of the refrigerator right at eye level. Then I went to my desk and I waited. The morning was agonizing. Every time I heard someone walk toward the break room, my heart would race. I kept glancing at the clock. 11 o'clock came and went. 11:30 arrived. I saw Brendan Vance stand up from his desk and stretch. He looked over at me with that same smug grin and said he was heading to the break room to grab a snack before our big quarterly review meeting with the chief executive officer. My blood ran cold, but I just nodded and pretended to be busy with my spreadsheets. 10 minutes later, I heard a muffled shout from the direction of the kitchen. My heart leaped into my throat. I waited another 5 minutes, then I stood up and slowly walked toward the break room. When I entered, the room was empty, but the red lunchbox was sitting on the table. The lid was open, and a large portion of the pot pie had been scooped out. There were purple droplets on the floor leading toward the executive washroom. I felt a surge of adrenaline that was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The quarterly review was scheduled for 1 o'clock in the main conference room. This was the most important meeting of the year. The chief executive officer, a stern man named Mr. Sterling, had flown in from the New York office to hear our progress reports. Everyone was expected to be there in their best attire. I arrived a few minutes early and took my seat at the long mahogany table. A few moments later, Brendan Vance walked in. He was wearing his expensive navy blue suit and carrying a leather portfolio, but he was holding a white handkerchief over his mouth. He looked pale and he was sweating. He sat down directly across from me. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat and asked Brendan to start the presentation. Brendan stood up and tried to speak, but his voice was muffled by the cloth. Mr. Sterling looked annoyed and told him to put the handkerchief down so we could hear him properly. Brendan hesitated, then slowly lowered the cloth. The entire room gasped. Brendan's lips were a deep, dark, bruised shade of purple. His teeth were stained a shocking violet, and his tongue looked like he had been licking a grape-flavored marker. Even his cuticles and the tips of his fingers were stained a bright indigo. He looked like a character from a horror movie. Mr. Sterling stared at him in horror and asked what on earth happened to his face. Brendan started stammering, saying that he must have had an allergic reaction to something he ate for lunch. He tried to cover his mouth again, but the damage was done. I leaned forward and said in my calmest, most innocent voice that it was strange he had an allergic reaction because I had brought a chicken pot pie that went missing from the refrigerator today, and it had a special purple ingredient in it. I explained that I had been losing my lunches for months, and I had decided to use a safe food-grade dye to identify the culprit. The silence in the room was deafening. Brendan looked like he wanted to vanish into the floorboards. Mr. Sterling looked from Brendan's purple mouth to my calm face and then back again. He was a man who valued integrity above all else. He asked Brendan if he had stolen my lunch. Brendan tried to lie, but every time he opened his mouth, the evidence of his theft was there for everyone to see. He looked ridiculous and pathetic. He finally admitted that he had taken the pie because it looked better than the salad he had brought. Mr. Sterling told Brendan to leave the room immediately and wait in his office. After Brendan shuffled out looking like a shamed schoolboy, Mr. Sterling turned to me. He apologized for the behavior of his staff and thanked me for my cleverness in handling the situation. He said that theft was a serious violation of company policy and that he would not tolerate such a lack of character in his leadership team. The meeting continued without Brendan, and I ended up giving his part of the presentation myself. I knew the material better than he did anyway, and I knocked it out of the park. By the end of the day, Brendan Vance had been fired. It turned out that the company had been looking for a reason to let him go anyway because of his poor performance, and my little trap was the final straw. But the story does not end there. A few days later, I was moved into Brendan's old office and given a significant pay raise along with the title of marketing director. I finally had a door that I could close and a space of my own. I also bought a small personal refrigerator for my new office, which the company paid for as a gesture of goodwill. The office lunch thief was gone, and I was finally able to enjoy my meals in peace. However, there was one final twist that I did not see coming. About a month after I started my new role, I was cleaning out some of the old files in the back of the office when I found a small notebook that had belonged to Brendan. In it, he had kept a log of every lunch he had stolen from me. He had written down descriptions of the food and even rated them on a scale of 1 to 10. Next to the entry for the lobster mac and cheese, he had written "best thing I have ever eaten, too bad she is so annoying." But at the very back of the notebook, there was a list of other people he had been stealing from as well. It turns out, he was not just stealing my lunches, he was taking things from almost everyone in the office, and people were too afraid of him to say anything. By standing up for myself, I had actually helped the entire office get rid of a serial bully and thief. Now, whenever I walk through the break room, people smile at me and thank me. I still cook my gourmet meals every Sunday, but now I enjoy them in my own quiet office looking out at the Seattle skyline. Sometimes, I even bring a little extra to share with the interns because I know what it feels like to be hungry and ignored. My revenge was not just about the food coloring, it was about reclaiming my dignity and my joy, and that is a dish that is best served cold, or in the case of a chicken pot pie, piping hot and full of purple dye. The lesson I learned is that you should never let someone walk all over you, especially when it comes to your hard work and your lunch, because you never know when a little bit of midnight violet might change your life for the better. I am now the most respected person in the office, and no one ever touches a single grape or a crumb of bread that does not belong to them. We have a new culture of respect and honesty, and it all started with one very messy, very purple afternoon. I am happy I am successful, and most importantly, I am well fed. Every time I see a jar of food coloring in the grocery store, I cannot help but smile and think of Brendan's purple face, and how a simple baking supply became the greatest tool of justice I have ever known. Seattle is still rainy, and my job is still busy, but life is good, and my lunch is always exactly where I left it. That is the end of my story, but I hope it serves as a reminder to anyone out there who feels like they are being pushed around. Sometimes the best way to fight back is to be creative and stay calm, and let the other person show their true colors, or in Brendan's case, a very bright shade of purple. I have learned that the best revenge is living well and eating even better. I continue to explore new recipes, and I have even started a small food blog where I share my meal prep tips and a few stories from my life in the corporate world. People often ask me for the recipe for that chicken pot pie, but I tell them that the secret ingredient is something you can only find when you are truly pushed to your limit. It is the ingredient of self-respect, and it tastes better than anything else in the world. I have found my place in this city, and in this company, and I am no longer the quiet girl who lets people steal her joy. I am a leader, I am a chef, and I am a woman who knows exactly how to take care of herself. The purple stains on Brendan's reputation may never fade, but my future has never looked brighter. This experience taught me that even in a professional environment, you have to be your own advocate. You cannot wait for someone else to notice when you are being treated unfairly. You have to stand up and make it known, and if you have to use a little bit of professional-grade food coloring to do it, then so be it. It was a long journey from that first missing fork to my new executive office, but I would not change a single thing. The satisfaction of seeing the truth come out in such a public and undeniable way was worth every single lunch I lost. Now, I look forward to every Monday morning, not because I want to work, but because I know I have earned my place here and I have earned every delicious bite of my lunch. The rain in Seattle does not seem so gray anymore, and the coffee tastes a little sweeter, and the world feels a lot more just. I am Ella Johnson, and this was my revenge, and it was absolutely delicious. I hope that everyone who hears this story feels empowered to stand up for themselves in whatever way they can. Life is too short to let anyone steal your lunch or your happiness, so keep your head high and your kitchen stocked, and never be afraid to add a little color to a dull situation. It might just be the best decision you ever make. I certainly know it was for me, and I will never forget the day the office lunch thief finally got what was coming to him, and I finally got what I deserved. The end of that chapter of my life was just the beginning of a much better one, and I am enjoying every single minute of it. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember to always label your food and maybe keep a little purple dye in your pantry just in case. You never know when you might need to show someone their true colors. This has been a long road, but I am finally at peace, and my stomach is full and my heart is happy. That is all anyone can really ask for in this world. Goodbye from Seattle, and happy cooking to everyone who believes in justice and good food. I will continue to thrive, and I will continue to cook, and I will never let anyone take what is mine again. The victory is mine, and it is the sweetest thing I have ever tasted.